The airport was a beast that never slept. It was a massive building filled with endless noise, bright lights, and a constant sound of wheels rolling on hard floors. Thousands of people were rushing in every direction. Some were running to catch flights that were about to leave. Others were walking slowly, looking tired and confused. The air smelled like stale coffee, cleaning products, and that specific smell of jet fuel that seems to stick to your clothes. It was a place where nobody really wanted to be, but everyone had to pass through. Moving through this chaotic river of people was one man who seemed to be swimming against the current, while everyone else was rushing, checking their watches, or shouting into phones. This man was moving slowly, very slowly. He looked like a ghost drifting through a crowded party. He was not tall, but he had a presence that made you want to look twice. Yet he was doing everything he could to disappear. He wore a simple, dark hoodie that looked soft and old. Over that, he had a leather jacket that had clearly seen better days. It was worn out at the elbows, and the color had faded in spots. His jeans were loose and comfortable, not the fashionable kind people wear to look good, but the kind you wear when you have a long journey ahead of you. On his feet, he wore heavy boots that were covered in a layer of dust. They looked like they had walked on many different streets in many different cities. He carried a single bag over his shoulder. It was a duffel bag, battered and blue, hanging heavily by a long strap. It bounced gently against his hip with every step he took. He did not have a fancy suitcase with a handle. He did not have a laptop bag or a garment bag. Just this one simple bag that held everything he needed for his trip. His face was the most telling part of him. He had a beard that was starting to look a bit wild, like he hadn't trimmed it in weeks. His hair was messy, poking out in different directions under the hood of his sweatshirt. But it was his eyes that showed the real story. They were dark, deep, and incredibly tired. It wasn't just the kind of tired you get from a bad night of sleep. It was a heavy, deep exhaustion that sat in his bones. It looked like the weight of the whole world was resting on his shoulders. He had been carrying a lot lately, not just his bag, but emotions and memories that were hard to shake off. As he walked past a giant screen showing flight times and gate numbers, he kept his head down. He didn't want to make eye contact with anyone. He knew what happened when people recognized him. The smiles would turn into stares. The whispers would start. Then someone would ask for a photo or an autograph. Usually, he didn't mind. He loved people. But today, he just didn't have the energy. He felt empty. He felt like a battery that had been used up and forgotten to be recharged. He just wanted to find a quiet corner where he could sit down, close his eyes, and not be anyone for a little while. He walked past a bright store that sold expensive perfumes and chocolates. A child was crying loudly near a bench, dropping an ice cream cone on the floor, while a tired mother tried to clean it up. A businessman in a sharp suit was yelling into his phone about a meeting that was going wrong. The noise was intense. It bounced off the high ceilings and the polished walls, creating a constant hum that vibrated in your chest. The man in the leather jacket pulled his hood up further, trying to block out the world. He tightened his grip on the strap of his bag and kept walking. His flight wasn't boarding for a long time. He had hours to kill. The thought of sitting at the crowded gate, squeezed between a stranger eating a sandwich and another one watching a loud movie on a tablet, made him feel sick to his stomach. He needed peace. He needed soft chairs. He needed silence. That was when he saw it, at the end of the long, busy hallway. The crowd seemed to thin out slightly. There was a section of the terminal that looked different. The harsh, bright white lights of the main hall changed to a softer, warmer glow. The floor changed from a noisy tile to a plush, carpeted area. It was a lounge, a luxury lounge. It was enclosed by tall, clear glass walls that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Through the glass, the man could see a completely different world. It was calm inside. People were sitting on comfortable, deep sofas. Some were reading magazines. Others were typing quietly on laptops. There was no yelling, no running, no chaos. It looked like a sanctuary, a safe place away from the storm of the airport. He could see a coffee bar in the corner with actual ceramic mugs, not the paper cups they gave you outside. He saw baskets of fruit and bottles of water. It looked inviting. It looked like the kind of place where a tired soul could rest. He adjusted his bag on his shoulder and felt a small spark of hope. He walked toward the glass enclosure. His boots made a soft thudding sound on the carpet as he left the hard floor behind. With every step closer, he felt his muscles relax just a little bit. He imagined sinking into one of those soft chairs. He imagined closing his eyes and just listening to the hum of the air conditioning instead of the announcements about flights to Tokyo or London. He didn't care about the free drinks or the fancy snacks. He just wanted quiet. He approached the entrance. It was a sliding glass door that stood open slightly, waiting. Just outside the entrance, there was a sleek, modern podium made of white material. Standing behind it was a woman dressed in a crisp uniform. She looked neat and organized, with her hair pulled back tightly. She was holding a tablet computer in one hand and looking at the people walking by with a polite but professional expression. She was the guardian of the quiet room. The man stopped for a moment. He took a deep breath and smoothed down the front of his worn jacket. He knew he didn't look like he belonged in there. He knew he looked messy and tired. But he also knew that sometimes, if you're kind and polite, people will let you in. He wasn't trying to trick anyone. He was just a human being asking for a moment of rest. He didn't have a membership card in his pocket. He didn't have a special invitation. All he had was his name and the hope that it might be enough. Or maybe just a hope that the woman would see he was tired and let him sit anyway. He took the last few steps toward the podium. The noise of the terminal seemed to fade away the closer he got to the glass walls. He looked at the woman and offered a small, tired smile. He didn't say anything yet. He just waited for her to look up from her screen. He waited to see if she would look past the messy beard and the old boots to see the person underneath. He stood there, feeling smaller than he actually was, hoping for a little bit of kindness in a world that usually moves too fast to notice anyone. The woman standing behind the white podium did not look up immediately. She was focused intensely on the screen of her tablet, her finger tapping rhythmically against the glass. The man in the leather jacket waited patiently. He stood with his weight mostly on one leg, trying to ease the ache in his tired muscles. He watched the bustle of the terminal behind him through the reflection in the glass walls of the lounge. People were rushing, shouting, and dragging luggage, but here, just a few feet away, it was supposed to be peaceful. After a few long seconds, the woman finished whatever she was typing. She took a breath, smoothed the front of her blazer, and then finally lifted her eyes to see who was standing in front of her. When her eyes landed on him, her professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a mask she wore for everyone, but it seemed to stiffen when she took in his appearance. She looked at the messy hair peeking out from the hood. She looked at the scuffed boots. She looked at the battered blue duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Her gaze was quick, but it was sharp. It was the kind of look that measures how much money a person might have before they even open their mouth. "Welcome to Platinum Lounge," she said in a voice that was smooth but cool. "How may I assist you today?" The man shifted his bag slightly. He felt the weight of it pulling on his shoulder. He offered her a small, tired smile. He knew he looked rough. He knew he didn't fit in with the shiny, polished world inside that glass box, but he had hoped it wouldn't matter. "Hi," he said softly. His voice was a little rough, like gravel crunching under tires. "I have a pretty long layover before my next flight. I was wondering if I could come in and sit for a while, just to rest." The woman raised an eyebrow slightly. She didn't move her hand from the edge of the podium. "Do you have a membership with us, sir? Or are you flying business or first class today?" He shook his head slowly. "No, not today. I'm usually in the back," he said with a hint of self-deprecation. "But I thought maybe, I don't know. I've had a really hard week. I just need a quiet place to breathe." The woman's expression changed. The polite mask slipped just a fraction, and a look of suspicion took its place. She had heard every story in the book. People tried to talk their way into the lounge every day. They lied about their status. They tried to flirt. They tried to act important. To her, he just looked like another traveler trying to get something for free. "I understand, sir," she said, her voice becoming a bit firmer. "But access is strictly reserved for members and premium passengers. I cannot make an exception." He didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He just looked at her with eyes that seemed incredibly sad. "Okay," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm on the list? Sometimes a production company books things for me. My name is Keanu." He didn't say his last name. He didn't need to. In most of the world, That one name was enough, but the woman just stared at him blankly. She typed Keanu into her tablet with quick, sharp jabs of her finger. She waited for the screen to update. Nothing happened. She tried a few different spellings, her frown getting deeper. "I'm sorry," she said, looking up at him again. This time, there was no smile at all. She saw a scruffy man in a hoodie giving her a fake name. There is no Keanu on the guest list, and without a membership card or a boarding pass for the upper deck, I cannot let you pass. The man stood there for a moment. He looked past her, through the glass doors, into the quiet room. He saw the soft chairs. He saw the silence. He wanted it so badly. He just wanted to sit down and be alone for an hour. But he could see the determination on her face. She was doing her job. She was protecting the exclusivity of the space. Just then, a tall man in a sharp gray suit walked up behind a leather-jacketed man. He was wheeling a shiny metal suitcase. He tapped his foot impatiently, checking a very expensive gold watch on his wrist. The atmosphere suddenly changed. The pressure in the air went up. "Is there a problem here?" the businessman asked, his voice loud and demanding. He looked at the back of the leather jacket with obvious annoyance. The hostess looked relieved to have someone important arrive. "No, sir, just helping this gentleman. But it seems he doesn't have access." The man in the hoodie felt the eyes of the businessman burning into his back. He felt the judgment. He felt the shame of being turned away in public. It was a familiar feeling, the feeling of not being good enough, of not fitting in. But he didn't want to cause a scene. He didn't want to make the hostess's day harder or upset the man behind him. He took a small step back, lowering his head. "It's all right," he said to the woman. "No problem. Thank you for checking." The hostess gave a curt nod, already turning her attention to the man in the gray suit. "Good evening, sir. May I see your card?" The man in the leather jacket turned around slowly. He adjusted the strap of his bag. He felt incredibly heavy. The exhaustion was washing over him like a thick wave. He prepared himself to walk back into the noise and the chaos. He prepared to find a spot on the cold floor near the gate. But as he turned, he saw that a small crowd had gathered near the entrance of the lounge. People were staring, not with anger, but with wide eyes. They were looking from his face to the hostess, and back again. A teenager holding a backpack was looking at him with his mouth open, his phone forgotten in his hand. They recognized him. They knew exactly who he was. They were waiting to see what would happen next. In the movies, this was the part where the star would get angry. They would shout, "Do you know who I am?" They would demand to speak to a manager. They would use their power to get what they wanted. The tension was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. The businessman was watching, waiting for a scene. The hostess was tense, ready to call security if the scruffy man caused trouble. But the man in the leather jacket didn't shout. He didn't pull out his phone to make a call. He didn't try to use his fame to humiliate the woman who was just doing her job. He looked at the hostess one last time. She was busy scanning the businessman's card, ignoring him completely now. He looked at the floor, then back at her. A strange sense of calm came over him. He realized that getting angry wouldn't fix anything. It would just make the world a little louder and a little meaner, and the world already had enough meanness in it. He reached into the pocket of his worn jacket. The hostess glanced over, perhaps worried he was pulling out a weapon or an ID to argue again. Instead, his hand came out holding a simple wrapped chocolate bar. It was slightly bent from being in his pocket. He had bought it earlier at a newsstand but hadn't eaten it yet. He gently placed the chocolate bar on the pristine white surface of the podium, right next to the woman's tablet. She stopped what she was doing and looked at it, confused. Then she looked up at him. "You look like you could use this," he said softly. His voice was kind, with no trace of sarcasm or anger. "It's been a long day for everyone. Thank you for trying to help." Before she could say anything, before the businessman could react, and before the people watching could snap a photo, he turned and walked away. He walked back toward the noise, leaving the luxury and the silence behind him, leaving everyone staring at his back in complete shock. The silence that followed the man's departure was heavy and strange. It hung in the air near the podium like smoke. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The businessman in the gray suit tapped his foot again, louder this time, clearly annoyed that the process had been stalled by someone who didn't belong. But the hostess didn't immediately scan his card. She was staring at the object sitting on her pristine white podium. It was just a simple chocolate bar. The wrapper was slightly crinkled, and the corners were a bit squashed from being in a pocket. It looked so small and out of place next to her high-tech tablet and the glossy surface of the desk. It was worth maybe $2. Yet, it was the most confusing thing that had happened to her all day. She had just turned a man away. She had essentially told him he wasn't good enough to enter this room. And his response wasn't anger. It wasn't an argument. It was a gift. He had felt sorry for her. He had seen the tiredness in her eyes, even while she was judging his clothes, and he had tried to make her day a little better. "Are we going to stand here all day?" the businessman barked, breaking the silence. "I have a call to make." The hostess jumped, as if waking from a dream. She quickly grabbed his card and scanned it, her movements jerky and rushed. "Yes, sir. So sorry, sir. Go right in." She handed the card back to him, but her heart wasn't in the apology. As the man scoffed and walked through the glass doors, disappearing into the quiet luxury, the hostess looked down at the chocolate again. She felt a strange tightness in her chest. It was guilt. It was a realization that she had made a mistake, not about the rules. She had to follow the rules, but about the person. She had judged a book by its tattered cover, and she had missed the kindness written on the pages inside. Meanwhile, the man in the leather jacket was walking away. He didn't look back. He didn't stomp or storm. He just walked with that same slow, heavy rhythm. The noise of the terminal rushed back to meet him. The announcement about flight delays, the crying of children, the beeping of the metal detectors, all washed over him like a wave. He pulled the hood of his sweatshirt up a little higher, trying to create a small shadow for himself in the harsh, bright lights of the airport. He was tired. His feet hurt. His back ached from carrying the duffel bag. A part of him just wanted to find a corner on the hard floor, curl up, and sleep until it was time to board. He felt invisible again, which is exactly what he wanted. He was just another traveler in a crowd of strangers, heading nowhere fast. But as he walked past a row of rigid, uncomfortable plastic seats attached to the floor, he stopped. His eyes, which had been cast downward watching his boots, lifted. He saw something that made him forget his own exhaustion for a moment. A few yards away, an elderly woman was standing in front of a bench. She was tiny, fragile-looking, with skin like crumpled paper and white hair pulled back in a loose bun. She was struggling with a bag that was far too big for her. It was a tapestry bag, heavy and overstuffed, and she was trying to lift it up onto the metal rack above the seats so she could sit down. Her arms were shaking with the effort. She would lift it a few inches, her face grimacing, and then have to drop it back down, gasping for air. Around her, the stream of people continued to flow. A young man in a suit walked past her, talking loudly on his phone, not even seeing her struggle. A group of teenagers laughed and ran by, focused on their own conversation. The airport was a busy place, and everyone was in a hurry. Everyone was focused on their own problems, their own flights, their own lives. She was just an obstacle in their path. The man in the hoodie watched her for a second. He saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't just struggling with the bag. She was afraid she was going to drop it, or that she wasn't strong enough to make it. She looked helpless. Without a moment of hesitation, he changed direction. He didn't think about how heavy his own bag was. He didn't think about how he had just been humiliated. He just saw someone who needed help. He walked over to her, his boots making a soft sound on the floor. He didn't say hey, or try to get her attention first. He simply stepped up beside her and gently placed his hand under the bottom of her heavy tapestry bag. The woman flinched, startled by the sudden presence. She looked up, her eyes wide and worried, ready to defend herself or her belongings. But when she saw his face, her fear melted away. He wasn't looking at her with impatience. He wasn't looking at her like she was in the way. His eyes were soft and calm. "I've got it," he said quietly. His voice was low and gentle, a soothing rumble. Before she could protest, he lifted the bag with one arm, as if it weighed nothing at all. He didn't grunt or strain. He simply lifted it up and slid it securely onto the metal rack above the seat. He made sure it was balanced perfectly so it wouldn't fall. He turned back to her and wiped his hands on his pants. "Is that okay?" he asked. "Is there anything else up there you need?" The woman stared at him. She was breathless from her efforts, but now she was breathing easier. She looked at this scruffy man in the old leather jacket. She didn't see a movie star. She didn't see a messy traveler. She just saw a kind soul. "Oh, thank you," she whispered, reaching out and gently touching his arm. "Thank you so much. It was so heavy. I thought my arm was going to break." "No trouble at all," he said, giving her a small, genuine smile. The kind of smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Those things get heavy. You have a safe trip now, all right?" She nodded, tears actually welling in her eyes. "You too, son. You too." He didn't wait for her to say anything else. He didn't wait for a thank you or a reward. He gave a slight nod, picked his own duffel bag back up, and continued walking. Inside the luxury lounge, separated by the thick glass walls, a few people had stopped their conversations. They were standing near the window, looking out. They had seen the man leave. They had seen him walk away from the exclusive comfort they were enjoying. And now, they were watching him through the glass. They watched as he knelt on the dirty floor of the terminal to tie the woman's shoelace that had come undone, a detail he had noticed as he turned to leave. They watched him help her with her shawl when she shivered. The hostess was standing inside, too, watching from her podium. She looked at the chocolate bar on her desk, then out the window at the man. She saw the people in the terminal starting to look at him, pointing, recognizing him now that the pressure was off. But he didn't care. He was just moving through the world, doing good things, not because there was a camera on him, but because that was just who he was. The people inside the lounge, with their expensive suits and their first-class tickets, suddenly felt very small. They realized that the man walking on the other side of the glass had something they didn't have. He had a warmth, a light, that didn't require a membership card to access. The lounge was just a room, but the man out there, he was a real deal. After the kind moment with the elderly woman, the man in the leather jacket continued his slow journey through the terminal. He was getting more tired with every step. The adrenaline that had kept him going was starting to fade, leaving a deep ache in his bones. He walked past crowded gates where people were sitting shoulder to shoulder on rigid chairs. Every plastic seat seemed to be taken. People were lying across 3 seats, trying to sleep or leaning against their luggage with their eyes closed. The air smelled of fast food and too many people breathing the same air. He didn't want to disturb anyone. He didn't want to ask someone to move their coat so he could sit down. He just wanted to disappear. Eventually, he found a quieter spot, far away from the shops and the busy gates. It was near the end of a long corridor where the floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto the airfield. This was the place where people usually went to smoke or to make private phone calls. It was less crowded here. The man looked around. There was a small patch of empty space on the carpeted floor next to the thick glass. It wasn't a seat. It was just the floor. But to him, it looked like the best spot in the entire airport. He walked over to it and lowered himself down. He didn't care that his pants might get dirty or that people might stare at a grown man sitting on the ground. He let out a long, deep sigh as he settled onto the floor. He leaned his back against the cold wall and stretched his legs out in front of him. He took his battered blue duffel bag and placed it on his lap. Then he leaned forward, resting his forehead on the bag for a moment, like a man praying at an altar. He just needed a minute of silence. He just needed to block out the lights and the noise. For a few minutes, he sat there perfectly still, just breathing. He looked small and lonely, a solitary figure huddled against the glass wall of the busy airport. But he wasn't alone for long. A young man, who looked to be about 20 years old, was walking past. He was dressed in a hoodie and sneakers, carrying a backpack. He was looking down at his phone, scrolling through social media. But something made him look up. Maybe it was the movement in the corner of his eye. When he saw the man on the floor, he froze. His eyes went wide. He stopped walking. He looked at the messy hair, the beard, the leather jacket. He looked at the profile of the face that was currently resting on the bag. The young man's heart started beating faster. He knew that face. He had seen it on a screen hundreds of times. He took a hesitant step closer, unsure if he should approach. He didn't want to be annoying. He didn't want to be just another person bothering a celebrity, but he also felt a strange pull. The man on the floor didn't look like a celebrity right now. He just looked like a human being who was having a really hard day. As the young man stood there, trying to decide what to do, the man on the floor lifted his head. He sensed someone standing nearby. He opened his eyes and saw the young man staring at him with a look of shock and curiosity. Most famous people would have pulled their hood down lower. They would have put on sunglasses or looked away. They would have put up a wall. But this man didn't do that. He saw the recognition in the young man's eyes, and he didn't run from it. He didn't put on a fake, happy face either. He just offered a tired, honest smile. It was a smile that said, asterisk, yeah, it's me. I'm just a guy sitting on the floor. Asterisk. Then he did something that surprised the young man even more. He shifted his body and patted the empty spot on the carpet next to him. Hey, the man on the floor said softly. His voice was rough but kind. You look like you're carrying a heavy load too. Come sit down. The floor is actually not that bad. The young man blinked. He couldn't believe it. Here was one of the most famous actors in the world, inviting a stranger to sit on the airport floor with him. The young man felt his nervousness melt away. He smiled back and walked over, dropping his backpack and sitting down on the floor next to his idol. For the next 20 minutes, they sat there, two guys on the floor, looking out at the airplanes on the tarmac. They weren't talking about movies or scripts or Hollywood. They were talking about life. The young man opened up. He told the actor about his mother who was sick in the hospital back home. He talked about how scared he was that he wouldn't get back in time to see her. He talked about how lost he felt. The man in the leather jacket listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't give shallow advice like, it will all be okay. He listened with his full attention, nodding slowly, his dark eyes full of understanding. When the young man finished talking, the older man spoke. He talked about his own losses. He talked about the pain of missing people you love. He talked about how grief never really goes away, it just changes shape. He spoke simply without fancy words, but everything he said hit the young man right in the heart. You just keep going, the actor said, looking out at the big planes taking off into the sky. You breathe in and you breathe out, and you try to be kind. That's all any of us can do. That's enough. Sitting on that dirty carpet, the young man felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in months. He realized that the person sitting next to him wasn't a character from a movie. He was a real person who had known deep sadness and had come out the other side, still wanting to be good to people. Inside the luxury lounge just a few hundred feet away, the scene was different. The people inside the glass walls were watching. They could see the two figures sitting on the floor through the windows. They saw the young man wiping tears from his eyes. They saw the man in the jacket patting him on the shoulder. The hostess was watching too. She stood near her podium, the forgotten chocolate bar still sitting there. The businessman in the gray suit was sipping a glass of expensive wine, looking out the window with a confused expression. He couldn't understand why someone with so much money and fame would choose to sit on the floor. He didn't understand that comfort isn't about soft chairs or free wine. The people in the lounge had everything they wanted materially, but they were isolated. They were separate from the world. The man on the floor had nothing but a bag and a jacket, but he was connected. He was right there in the mess of life, touching someone's soul. The sun was starting to go down outside. The sky turned a deep orange and purple. The lights on the runway flickered on. The terminal lights reflected off the glass, creating a mirror effect. But inside, sitting on the cold floor, it felt real. The young man eventually had to go to catch his flight. He stood up and brushed off his pants. He looked down at the man sitting on the floor. Thank you, the young man said, his voice shaking. Seriously, thank you for listening. Get home safe, the man replied, looking up with a gentle nod. Take care of your mom. The young man walked away with a lighter step, looking back one last time to see the man lean his head back against his bag, closing his eyes again. He wasn't waiting for applause. He wasn't waiting for anyone to tell him he was a hero. He was just resting, ready for whatever came next. The people behind the glass continued to watch, realizing that they had witnessed something rare. They had seen that true luxury isn't a VIP pass. It's having a heart big enough to share the floor with a stranger. The silence that settled over the corner of the terminal was not empty. It was full. After the young man walked away, wiping his eyes and holding his head a little higher, the man in the leather jacket was left alone again, but the air around him felt different. It felt warmer, lighter somehow. The heavy weight that had been pressing down on his shoulders when he first approached the lounge seemed to have lifted, if only just a little. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the sun had finished its descent. The sky was now a deep velvety blue, filled with the blinking lights of planes taking off and landing. The red and green lights traced invisible paths in the dark sky. Inside the terminal, the harsh artificial lights took over, casting long, stretching shadows across the floor. But the man in the hoodie didn't mind the dark. He sat with his back against the cold wall, his legs stretched out, his eyes closed. He was breathing deeply, in and out, finding a rhythm that matched the hum of the building. He was at peace. Inside the glass walls of the luxury lounge, the atmosphere had changed completely. The earlier buzz of status and ego had died down. The people sitting on the plush sofas were no longer talking loudly on their phones or bragging about their business deals. They were quiet. They were looking out the glass, watching the solitary figure sitting on the floor. The hostess was still standing at her podium. She hadn't moved. The chocolate bar sat next to her tablet, catching the reflection of the overhead lights. She kept looking at it, then looking out at the man. Her heart felt strange. It felt tight and full at the same time. She had been trained to see value in membership cards and expensive suits. She was taught to protect the space for the important people. But as she watched the man on the floor, the man she had turned away, she realized she had made a mistake. She had let the most important person in the terminal walk away, not because he was a movie star, but because of what was inside him. She remembered the look in his eyes when he handed her the chocolate. It wasn't a look of arrogance. It was a look of understanding. He knew she was tired. He knew she was just doing her job. He didn't hold her judgment against her. He had offered her grace instead of anger. The businessman in the gray suit was sitting near the window with a glass of scotch in his hand. He swirled the liquid around, watching the ice cubes melt. He looked at the man on the floor, then looked at his own reflection in the glass. He saw a man in a suit that cost more than most people's cars. He had a first-class ticket waiting for him. He had access to this quiet room with free food and comfortable chairs. Yet, watching the man outside, the businessman felt a sudden pang of jealousy. He realized that the man on the floor possessed a freedom that money couldn't buy. The man on the floor didn't need the approval of a hostess or a lounge to feel whole. He was okay exactly where he was. The businessman took a sip of his drink, but it didn't taste as good as it usually did. It tasted bitter. More travelers walked past the lounge entrance. Some of them stopped and pointed. They recognized the actor. They pulled out their phones to take a picture, but then they stopped. They saw him resting. They saw the stillness of his posture, and one by one, they lowered their phones. Nobody wanted to break the spell. It was as if the entire terminal had silently agreed to give him this moment. It was a collective act of respect, a silent thank you for the kindness he had shown the old woman and the young man. He was famous, yes, but in that moment, he was something more. He was a symbol of decency in a chaotic world. Over the intercom, a robotic voice crackled to life. Now boarding Flight 492 to New York at Gate 14. The man on the floor opened his eyes. He didn't jump up. He didn't scramble. He moved slowly, deliberately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his boarding pass to check the gate number. It was his flight. He groaned softly as he pushed himself up from the ground. His knees popped, and he stretched his back, feeling the stiffness that comes from sitting on a hard floor. He picked up his battered blue duffel bag and slung it over his shoulder. He brushed off the front of his pants, not out of vanity, but just out of habit. He took one last look out the window at the dark tarmac, taking a deep breath of the recycled air. He turned to face the long walk to the gate. As he walked past the lounge, the hostess watched him. She wanted to run out. She wanted to stop him. She wanted to tell him she was sorry, that she made a mistake, that he could come in now if he wanted. She wanted to tell him that he was welcome there, but her feet felt like they were glued to the carpet. She knew she couldn't say that. It would sound empty. It would sound like she only wanted him inside because of who he was, not because he was a human being who needed a seat. So she just watched. The man didn't look into the lounge. He didn't look for her face. He kept his eyes forward, focused on the path ahead. He walked with a quiet dignity. He didn't need the validation of walking through those glass doors. He had found his own sanctuary on the floor, in the conversation with a stranger, in the simple act of being kind. As he disappeared into the crowd, heading toward his gate, the lounge remained silent. The businessman set his glass down on the table with a heavy clink. The hostess finally picked up the chocolate bar. She unwrapped it slowly. She took a small bite. It was sweet and simple. She looked out the window where the man had been sitting. Even though he was long gone now, the floor was empty. There was just a smudge on the glass where his head had rested. But the feeling stayed. The people in the lounge looked at each other, but nobody spoke. They all understood something now, something they hadn't understood when they walked in. They realized that luxury isn't about velvet ropes or membership cards. It isn't about being better than the person standing next to you. Real luxury is having a heart that is open. It is having the strength to be gentle when the world is harsh. It is the ability to sit on the cold floor with a stranger and make them feel like a king. The man on the flight to New York was just going home. He wasn't thinking about the lounge. He wasn't thinking about the people watching him. He was just a man, tired and humble, walking through life one step at a time. But to everyone who saw him that night, he was a reminder. He was proof that even in a busy, cold, and impersonal airport, the most valuable thing you can carry isn't a credit card. It's kindness. And that is something no one can ever take away from you.